Welcome to Lesson 6.8, Implementing Information Security Continuous Monitoring, ISCM. In your Candidate Information Bulletin, we are in the Security Assessment and Testing domain. We are in Key Area of Knowledge C, which is Collect Security Process Data. Our topics for this lesson will include ISCM objectives and processes, metrics, frequency, business intelligence, predictive analytics, risk tolerance, and NIST resources. So Information Security Continuous Monitoring, ISCM, is defined by NIST as maintaining ongoing awareness of information security, vulnerabilities, and threats to support organizational risk management decisions. The ISCM process was designed to support the NIST risk management framework for ongoing and iterative monitoring. The ISCM process was designed for federal agencies, but is adaptable to any public or private sector organization. So the objective of ISCM is to continually be measuring and reporting on the effectiveness of organizational security controls. So in addition to point-in-time examinations and point-in-time testing, ISCM is providing a continual flow of feedback. This objective necessitates maintaining an up-to-date inventory of all systems so that we have an inclusive scope, accurate architectural diagrams, security control documentation, threat monitoring and modeling, and implementation of processes to collect, to analyze, and to report on security metrics and supporting data. So the ISCM process starts with defining, then establishing, implementing, analyzing, responding, reviewing, updating, and you can see iteratively that brought us right back up to define. The continuous risk management process maps to risk tolerance, so we're going to choose our targets and our metrics based on our risk tolerance, is adaptable because organizations change and fluctuate, and does actively involve management because we don't want to just collect metrics, we want to report back on metrics and then have risk management activities take place. So the starting point is defining an ISCM strategy that's based on the organizational risk tolerance and takes into consideration the value of our assets, strategic alignment, our control environment, identified weaknesses, and threat profile. The strategy should be codified in policy, and it should include responsibilities, what our key indicators are, meaning what are we looking for, what are acceptable sample sizes, and what is the reporting format going to be, and what is the reporting structure. So we want to codify that we're going to have these things in policy, and then our implementation specifications will be in our standards. Establishing an ISCM program requires that the organization define criteria and processes. Now the criteria and processes, again, will be codified, but they're going to be codified in standards, not in policy, and they're going to include the ISCM tools and methodology. And there is no just one set of tools or methodology. But we're going to define here what we are going to use to have our key indicators, to collect our data, and to analyze our data. So we also have to define what our metrics are going to be, how frequent we're going to collect the data, and that frequency might vary depending upon the criticality or the sensitivity of the system. The frequency of assessment and reporting, so how often are we going to be analyzing the data and how often are we going to be reporting up to management. Again, that's going to depend on criticality, on sensitivity, and most certainly on the risk tolerance of the organization. Our metrics should be derived from very specific objectives, and they should provide meaningful information that can be used to support decision-making and reporting requirements. So just reams and reams of statistics, aren't useful. They really need to be meaningful and they need to be contextual. So metrics can be calculated from a combination of security status monitoring, security control assessment data, and from data that's collected from one or more security controls. So for example, we might say the number and severity of vulnerabilities identified and remediated might be derived from an initial vulnerability scan, from our remediation reports, from our patch management reports, and from our follow-up vulnerability data. So we're taking a combination of all those things. Again, we had a scan, We identified vulnerabilities, so we had a number and severity. We have our remediation report that talks about how we're responding to that. We have our patch management reports that may correspond to any patches that need to be implemented, and what happened when we did our vulnerability follow-ups. So all of those may be calculated, for example, into a specific metric. The collection, the assessment, and the monitoring frequency are going to be influenced by a number of both static and dynamic factors and events, including the security control volatility, system categorization and classification, security controls with identified weaknesses. So if we have a security control that we know is weak, we're going to want to look at it more often. Our organizational risk tolerance, our threat information, which is where threat intelligence becomes so important because our threats can change over time, and vulnerability information, which again is important to vulnerability management because new vulnerabilities are being discovered all the time. So in looking at the security control volatility, the criticality and sensitivity of the system or the data, does the system or data already have identified weaknesses? What's our risk tolerance? What's happening with threats and what's happening with vulnerability? All of those are going to influence our collection, our assessment, and our monitoring frequency. The results of testing and examinations, and change triggers. We need to look at all of these factors, both static and dynamic, to determine the frequency of our collection, our assessment, and our monitoring. Implementation encompasses the capture and collection of data for predefined metrics. So to facilitate this objective, we need to make sure that tools and methodologies are used uniformly, that automation is employed whenever possible so that we have standardized, repeatable methods, and that interoperable data specifications like XML or SCAP, which we looked at when we looked at the national checklist, are used so that data can be collected once and then reused as applicable. Operational processes such as patch management are informed and complement the ISCM process, but are not replaced by the ISCM process. So we're still going to do our operational, our patch management, our vulnerability management. Those will happen from a security operations level. I want you to think about ISCM as sort of a higher level, more of a holistic way to look across the entire organization and capture pertinent information. Our metrics will need to be analyzed in context and reports generated for the intended reader. Additional data collection or supplemental activities may be required to clarify or support findings and support business intelligence. Now, business intelligence is sort of the intersection of what happened and why did it happen. So we're looking at both of those things, what happened and why did it happen. In addition, predictive analytics techniques may be employed. And predictive analytics is when the data is mined to predict trends in data. So we've got our metrics, we're going to be analyzing them, we're going to create reports for our intended audience. And we have to think about two outcome objectives. One is the business intelligence, so when something happened, we want to be able to explain what happened and why it happened, which is sort of backwards looking. But then we want to be forward looking in our predictive analysis and saying, based on what we know, how can we predict trends and behavior? Situations that fall outside of the organizational risk tolerance need to be reviewed by management and then responded to. And management's response can either be to accept the risk or to mitigate the risk. And if they choose to mitigate the risk, as a reminder, our options for mitigating risk are to reduce, share, transfer, or avoid. Your ISCM strategies and programs must be under a continuous review. The type of assessments, the applicability of metrics, and the frequency may need to be updated due to changes in the environment, which can include business objectives or direction, information system architecture, regulatory requirements, vendor relationships, and the threat environment. So that's going to bring us right back to the beginning of our circle in our iterative process. We go from update to define. So we define, we establish, we implement, we analyze, we respond, we review, we update. So that's our entire process, and it's going to continue going circle around and around. Remember, this is an iterative process. There's an excellent NIST resource. It's Special Publication 800-137, Information Security Continuous Monitoring for Federal Information Systems and Organizations. I would once again encourage you to access and download this publication. You don't need to read it in extraordinary detail, but at least go through the executive summary and make sure that you are comfortable with the concept of information security continuous monitoring. So that's going to bring us to a lesson 6.8 review. We started out by talking about our ISCM objectives and process, talked about metrics and the importance of having repeatable and reliable metrics, the frequency of how often we should both be collecting data, analyzing data, and reporting on data, which is directly tied into system criticality, information sensitivity, and risk tolerance. Business intelligence, which tells us what happened and why it happened. Predictive analytics, which allows us to identify trends and future behavior. Risk tolerance, and whether we're going to choose to accept the risk if it's outside of the norm, or whether we're going to choose to mitigate the risk by reducing it, by sharing it, by transferring it, or by avoiding it. And lastly, I introduced you to the NIST resource. Let's go into lesson 6.8, match the meaning. Terms on our left-hand side: risk tolerance, strategic alignment, policy, standard, metrics, business intelligence, predictive analytics, and risk avoidance. Some of the terms are new from this lesson, some you've had before. So go ahead, put me on pause, match up the meaning, come on back as soon as you're ready, and we'll go through these together. Let's take a look at our lesson 6.8 terms. Risk tolerance is our situational comfort level. Strategic alignment means that we are supporting the business objectives. A policy is a high-level governance document. Our standard is a mandatory specification. That's how we implement our policy. Metrics are relevant performance-related data. Business intelligence is understanding what happened and why. Predictive analytics is mining data for trends in behavior. And risk avoidance means we change or stop the activity. So as always, we're going to end our lesson with our CISSP exam tips. Going all the way back to the beginning of the lesson, the objective of ISCM is to continually measure the effectiveness of organizational security controls. Our second is that metrics should be meaningful and reliable, that bad metrics result in bad decisions. And lastly, that risk tolerance is a level of risk an entity is willing to assume to achieve a potential wanted result. So thanks for joining me for this lesson. I look forward to seeing you in the next.